What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 14, sleepers and studs.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to give you a sleeper pick and my favorite stud at each position.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, NFL Week 14, let's take a look at the quarterback position. My quarterback stud for Week 14 is Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks playing the New York Jets, who have the second worst defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Russell Wilson has averaged 26.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.7 rush attempts per game. Now, he's only scored 17, 14, and 20 fantasy points in the last 3 games, but he's gotten 7, 6, and 10 rush attempts in those games. Just hasn't been putting up the big fantasy numbers that he did earlier in the season. He's going to be about 7% owned, projected at 24.7 fantasy points here in Week 14, and he's 7,900 DraftKings salary and 1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47 points scored in this game, with the Seattle Seahawks favored by 13.5. So fantastic matchup here. And the reason that this is such a good stud pick is because the New York Jets are good defending the run, but they're not good defending the pass. And the Seattle Seahawks don't have much of a run game. Chris Carson has been limited in practice, so they may give him a break. Russell Wilson will be forced to pass the ball, and even though Vegas thinks that the Seattle Seahawks are going to be ahead in this game, I still think it's going to be a passing game script because the Seattle Seahawks are going to take what the defense gives them. So I like Russell Wilson here versus the New York Jets. Okay, my sleeper pick at the quarterback position is Kirk Cousins from the Minnesota Vikings playing the Tampa Bay Bucks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins has averaged 20 fantasy points per game on the season, but take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 26, 30, and 27 fantasy points in his last 3 games, and he's only going to be about 1% owned, projected at 18 fantasy points here in Week 14. He's 6,200 DraftKings salary and 1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 52.5 points scored in this game, with the Vikings trailing by 6.5. So you got a middle-of-the-pack matchup, a high-scoring game, and a passing game script with a quarterback that's been on fire at super low ownership. So I like Kirk Cousins here versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. My running back stud is Aaron Jones from the Green Bay Packers playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 3rd worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Aaron Jones has averaged 19.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 14.5 rush attempts per game and 4.8 pass targets per game. He scored 27 fantasy points last week off of 15 rush attempts and 3 pass targets. He's going to be about 9% owned, projected at 19.5 fantasy points here in Week 14. He's 7,600 DraftKings salary and 1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 55 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 7.5. So you got a fantastic matchup, a super high scoring game, and a running game script. So I like Aaron Jones here versus the Detroit Lions. Okay, my sleeper pick at the running back position is Melvin Gordon from the Denver Broncos playing the Carolina Panthers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Melvin Gordon has averaged 13 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 13.6 rush attempts per game and 2.8 pass targets per game. He scored 18, 3, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 15, 12, and 15 rush attempts. Now, he's not even going to be 1% owned, so this is a deep sleeper pick, and he's projected at 13 fantasy points here in week 14, and he's only $5,200 DraftKings salary and $900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46 points scored in this game, with the Broncos trailing by 3.5. So you got a good matchup, a close, competitive game, and Melvin Gordon's played pretty well the past 2 out of 3 games. He got 15 rush attempts and 2 pass targets last game. I think they're going to involve him in the offense again this week, so I like Melvin Gordon here versus the Carolina Panthers.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. My wide receiver stud is Keenan Allen from the LA Chargers playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Keenan Allen has averaged 19.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.1 pass targets per game. He scored 10, 16, and 39 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's going to be about 8% owned. He's on the field for 88% of the snaps. He's projected at 18.2 fantasy points here in week 14, and he's $7,700 DraftKings salary and $800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, with the Chargers trailing by 2.5. Now, this is a fantastic matchup, pretty high scoring game here. The Chargers got shut out by the New England Patriots last week, 45-0. So I think this is a big bounce back game for Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. So I like Keenan Allen here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, my sleeper pick at the wide receiver position is T.Y. Hilton from the Indianapolis Colts playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 8th worst defense overall, and they give up the 11th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Now, T.Y. Hilton has only averaged 9.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6 pass targets per game, but he scored 28, 18, and 7 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 11, 5, and 6 pass targets. He's going to be about 3% owned, projected at 12.2 fantasy points here in week 14, and he's $5,100 DraftKings salary and $900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Colts favored by 3. So he's got a good matchup, a high-scoring game, a close, competitive game, and you got to be encouraged by that 11-target, 28 fantasy point game that he put up last week. And really, he's had back-to-back good games here. It looks like T.Y. Hilton is healthy, and he's the T.Y. Hilton of old. he should continue to put up big numbers, so I like T.Y. Hilton here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. The two tight end studs on the slate are Travis Kelce and Darren Waller. Both of them have tough matchups, but if I'm going to pick between the two, I like Travis Kelce from the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Miami Dolphins, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing tight ends. Travis Kelce has averaged 21.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.2 pass targets per game. He scored 31, 16, and 30 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 13, 8, and 10 pass targets. He's projected at 18.1 fantasy points here in week 14. He's $7,400 DraftKings salary and $800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Kansas City Chiefs favored by 7.5. So Travis Kelce has pretty much been productive every single week this season. He gets a ton of pass targets, double-digit fantasy points in all but one game so far this year. So he's been super consistent, and he's only 600 more than Darren Waller. And Darren Waller has a tougher matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts, and he's just not putting up the numbers that Travis Kelce is. So I like Travis Kelce here versus the Miami Dolphins. Okay, my sleeper pick at the tight end position. There was a lot of guys to choose from here at the tight end position. Players that are going to be between 2 and 4% owned. You got guys like Hunter Henry, Rob Gronkowski, TJ Hawkinson, Jonnu Smith is back, Dalton Schultz. All those guys have pretty good matchups and are going to be low-owned tight ends this week. But my sleeper pick at the tight end position is Robert Tonyan from the Green Bay Packers playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 3rd worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing tight ends, Robert Tonyan has averaged 11.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.9 pass targets per game. But he scored 14, 18, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games, and he's gotten 5 pass targets in each of those games. He's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here in week 14, and he's $4,200 DraftKings salary and $1,700 more on FanDuel. So I like this pick because Vegas thinks there's going to be 55 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 7.5. So there's a lot of fantasy points to go around in this game. So I think you can stack a couple of Green Bay Packers, run it back with a Detroit Lions player like Marvin Jones Jr. So I like Robert Tonyan here versus the Detroit Lions.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.